No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. Those are the words of the Somali-British poet Warsan Shire, explaining why some migrants flee to escape conflict and insecurity. With hundreds of migrants dying in the Mediterranean every year, is Europe really doing enough to help them and the countries that take them in? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, record numbers of people are attempting to travel to European shores in boats. Many don't make it. Italy is one of the countries on the front line of the crisis. TRT World correspondent Joel Flynn has been reporting from the Italian island of Lampedusa, which finds itself once again receiving thousands of migrants. Here's a preview of a documentary he's made about the crisis, airing soon on TRT World.
Dawn breaks over the South Mediterranean Sea. This is the no man's land of the migrant crisis. Neither here nor there, not in Africa, but not yet in Europe.
Is anyone in the water?
This stretch of water has been crossed by a record number of migrants this year. During 1 week in early September, nearly 10,000 arrived on the Italian island of Lampedusa. And in the 24-hour period of September 12th, 6,800 people, crammed into a flotilla of some 120 boats, reached the tiny outcrop. TRT World was there to witness it. The situations these people say they're fleeing include violent conflict and economic hardship, but their current circumstances on Lampedusa are also difficult.
Right now, I just want this situation to improve, because it's not easy. We've been here for 3 days, since September 12, so we want to leave, wherever that might be.
Most of the migrants arriving here are men, but large numbers of mothers like Claudine with small children are also arriving. They are proving to be among the most at risk. One 5-month-old baby died during a rescue operation while we were there. As difficult as this situation is now, however, these are the lucky ones who made it. Here in Lampedusa, Italian authorities are struggling to cope with the thousands of people that are arriving every day. But despite assistance from non-governmental organisations, NGOs themselves are also being targeted. Sea-Watch is one of them. Its rescue vessel, the Aurora, was impounded by the Italian Coast Guard in August. That was over accusations it was collecting passengers from multiple migrant boats before returning to port, in violation of an Italian law passed in February. Sea-Watch has accused Italy and the European Union of being complicit in human rights abuses committed by the Libyan Coast Guard.
Every time we take off from Lampedusa with our aircraft, we reach the Libyan search and rescue area. What we are prepared to see is continuous illegal pushbacks operated by the so-called Libyan Coast Guard using patrol boats that were donated by Italy.
Lampedusa, meanwhile, is struggling. The island has little room, only 20 square kilometres of earth, and a resident population of just 6,000. Its main industries are fishing and tourism. Both have been affected by the surge in arrivals. In exclusive comments provided to TRT World, Italian Interior Minister Matteo Piantedosi said Italy needs help.
Italy's borders are Europe's borders, and as such, it is key for Italy to collaborate with the EU in a coordinated way to find lasting solutions to contain migratory flows.
And until then, migrants will continue to try to reach Europe through the Mediterranean, and more will pay for the risky journey with their lives.
And Joel is with us now to tell me more. Also joining us is Nabila Ramdani, a French-Algerian journalist and author of a newly published book, Fixing France: How to Repair a Broken Republic. And Joseph Downing, Senior Lecturer in International Relations at Aston University. Welcome to all of you. Joel, I want to start with you. What did you see on the ground in Lampedusa, and how shocked were you by the surge in migrants while you were there?
Well, look, the first thing you notice when you get to Lampedusa, Enda, is the size of it. This is a tiny outcrop of land in the middle of the Mediterranean. It is barely an island. It's rocky, it's dusty, it is beautiful to be sure, but the reason that it's seeing such large numbers of people coming across is because of its proximity to, in particular, Tunisia and the Tunisian city of Sfax. The airport just about fits in it. The small fishing armada is on which its economy relies is otherwise the only signs that you would see of the sort of things that are going on there. But it is this proximity that is the reason that so many people are coming across. Now, that is not new. We have forever had the same issue of Europe being that close to North Africa. But clearly something has been changing. What the locals were telling us when we were on the ground there, though, is that this is not a change that has been happening this year. It's not even been happening over the last few years. We have seen over the last decade or more a series of incidences in which migrants were coming across, in particular in the wake of the Arab Spring in 2011. That has led to the huge numbers and to the growing inability of Lampedusa and of Italy in particular to be able to deal with this. One local, for instance, though, said that it goes back even further than that. They have said that they have been seeing migrants coming into Lampedusa for getting on to 30 years. So even though we are talking about this as a new phenomenon, even though we are trying to articulate this as something that the European Union has to try and deal with now, it is something that has existed for quite some time. And the fact that Lampedusa in particular is so overwhelmed, the fact that Italy is unable to deal with this situation, attests to the fact that this is something that has had repeated issues where people have ignored the chance to resolve this issue. And that is what people on the ground were so angry about. That is what they were telling us they're upset about. And this is not something that they think that Italy is able to solve on its own. When we were shooting, we were hearing repeatedly, where is Ursula von der Leyen in all of this? Where is the European Union in all of this? And when we look at Lampedusa and the inability of authorities there to deal with the sheer numbers, you should look at Italy in general. Italy can't deal with these numbers either. And we know, too, that most of the migrants, certainly the migrants that we talk to and the migrants that you will typically hear on the streets of Lampedusa and elsewhere, they are not planning on staying in Italy. Most of them are heading for France, for Brussels, for Germany. And so the idea that this is a new problem, the idea that we will see anything like a solution to this is certainly not something an opinion that we encountered when we were there.
Joseph, Nabila, I'll come to you first. Are the Italians right to feel aggrieved at how little they see the rest of Europe doing for them on this?
Well, I think they get hit harder in terms of number, and it remains the case, as Joel was just saying, that migrants see Italy as a point of entry, but they do not necessarily want to remain in Italy. They want to move north, because what is very true is that southern Italy can be a very poor place, underdeveloped. And there's plenty of evidence that migrants want to move up north. So criminals, people smugglers, focus on getting their clients, if you like, from Africa to Italy as the first port of call, because the journey is easier, if you like, but it remains extremely dangerous nonetheless. Having said that, migrants tend to view Northern Europe as a more secure place, as a more economically prosperous, and that's why a lot of immigrants or migrants try to make their way up north and when they arrive in Italy. But there is this kind of imbalance, if you like, especially from an Italian point of view, that other countries are not doing as much to welcome very often what are legitimate refugees who are fleeing war-torn zones, not least of all because this is the consequence of Western interference, often bombing in their own countries. So Germany and France have been taking a lot more of immigrants every year. That's undoubtedly the case, even more so than Britain, simply because Britain is an island and therefore it's harder to get to Britain. Last year there was 250,000 people, that is to say 250,000 people who claimed asylum in Germany. The figure is 130,000 for France, and you compare this with 80,000 in the UK. So traditionally, France is very much seen as an immigrant nation, primarily because of its borders with Spain, with Italy, and also because of its proximity across the sea to Africa. And it's often said that 1/10 of France's population comes from an immigrant background, but the figures are much higher now. It is estimated, actually, that 32% of people under 60 have migrant ancestry. Germany has also taken on more immigrants, I would contend, because it has become a hugely popular destination for immigrants because of Germany's change of image, if you like. They try to be seen as a more liberal, welcoming country, especially after the horrors of the Second World War. But you do still have an awful lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric in France, not least of all because of the rise of the far right. We have a very fiercely anti-immigrant party that threatens to deliver a president in France. And the current government has also a pretty sinister language when it comes to its approach to immigration. And that's why, last month only, we had the Pope who visited Marseille, and he effectively, it was a call, he spoke there, and it was very much a call to ask for the treatments of migrants to be in line with a civil way, if you like, of treating migrants, and insisting that legitimate migrants in particular do not have to die at sea. There has to be more to be done to guarantee safe corridors for people to claim asylums.
Joseph, the new Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, she speaks very strongly on all of this. Do you think she's got a point calling out other European leaders for their perceived inaction?
I mean, not really, because you can see it's really difficult for Europe to respond to this crisis. And I think we need to be quite clear to distinguish this from, the 2015 migrant crisis, where we saw people coming from the Eastern Mediterranean because primarily of the Syrian civil war, to something new today, which we see people coming across from Tunisia effectively into Lampedusa from places that aren't really actually at war, right? Guinea, the Ivory Coast, Egypt are all countries that are highly represented in the numbers we've seen in the past few months, yet none of these countries are in a current armed conflict, right? But to come up with a European solution is extremely difficult. The European states do not want to accept resettlement. They do not want to accept burden sharing in terms of being given a quota of migrants to resettle each year. It's too politically contentious. What the European Union has done previously, and what they're in the process of doing currently in Tunisia, which is yet to come into force, is that they will pay states, and this is, quite problematic in many ways because of human rights abuses and poor conditions in those states. They're in the process of doing something similar in Tunisia that they did with Turkey, which is to pay non-European states to effectively establish the European border in Asia and Africa. So they're in the current process of setting up a task force in Tunisia to effectively stop migrants crossing and to hold migrants instead in Tunisia with the serious issues that we see, on social media of, Black African migrants being dumped in the Tunisian desert by the Tunisian army and the Tunisian police. And I think this is the most likely response, and unfortunately it will leave many of these individuals in quite poor conditions.
Well, we know that Lampedusa has had a record-breaking year, a huge number of landings from migrants on these boats. According to Ylva Johansson, the European Commissioner for Home Affairs, the EU has so far this year received more than 250,000 so-called irregular arrivals, mainly in Italy and arriving via Lampedusa. The Italian Interior Ministry says 118,500 migrants arrived by boat in Italy from the start of the year until the 12th of September. That is double the figure for the same period last year. Joel, the phrase breaking point is often used, but you spelled out in graphic terms just how tiny Lampedusa is. Do the people there really feel they're on the front line and they're forgotten about?
Absolutely. Categorically, they feel forgotten about. And they, as I said, feel that it's the European Union that's forgetting them, not the Italian government. Look, I think it needs to be said that these are people who are not insensitive to the plight of the migrants. When we saw the numbers of people crossing that week when we were there, people in the streets were subsequently out offering them bread, offering them water, offering them shade. The capacity for actually holding migrants there in Lampedusa is only something noted in the hundreds, I believe, certainly for the Migration Processing Centre run by the Italian Red Cross. So the scale of the problem is, beyond the pale when it comes to what it's able to hold. But the people they also have their lives. They have their own economy. They rely on tourism to a lot of extent, as well as fishing, and it's something that's being affected, obviously, by migration as well. So these are people that are being made poorer by the situation, not just, of course, in terms of what's happening, but because they're not getting enough help on top of that. We witnessed them frustrated. We tried to get into a meeting with the mayor and couldn't because his door was rammed shut by 50 or so business people in there, obviously angry, losing their tempers, saying something needs to change. We need more help. This is unsustainable. But as I said, this is not a situation that's new. The mayor, to his, if we were to defend him, is fairly toothless in this situation as well. His powers are not significant in this regard. But Georgia Maloney has said the same thing. And I think with regards to Georgia Maloney, it's worth remembering that she was put into power essentially on the back of some incredibly strong rhetoric. And when we asked people about that rhetoric, they said, well, what else are we supposed to do? Everything else seems to have failed. Maloney, though, seems to have changed her tone somewhat. And we had some exclusive comments from the Italian Interior Minister at the time when we were there, Matteo Piantadosi, who said that legal migration routes are something that Italy is now looking at, as well as being a potentially significant way of trying to deal with this situation. And I think this is rhetoric that we've heard too from other countries in Europe. But as far as the people on the ground are concerned, this is a crisis for everybody. It's not just a crisis for migrants. This is a crisis of working people's livelihoods, and certainly in Lampedusa, but right across the country, you can see that bearing itself out.
Nabila, while European leaders talk, and there are obviously fractious relationships between countries like Germany, France, the UK, Italy, do you feel people traffickers are taking advantage of that?
Well, very much so, because not least of all, the EU is, of course, all about cooperation, and cooperation continues to a certain extent amongst member states. But it has to be said that Brexit has suddenly made it more difficult to deal with Britain in terms of clamping down on those people smugglers. And there are frequent tensions between the French and the British in relation to the small boats getting into the UK. The British frequently accuse the French of not doing enough to crack down on that. And there are certainly elements amongst the governing Conservative party in the UK who are very hard line on immigration, not least of all the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who compared the migrants coming across the Channel as an invasion. So this kind of rhetoric really doesn't help. Cross-channel migration has always been a big issue. I remember, covering the constant, tensions between the French and the British over what is the camp, which was called the jungle, referred to as the jungle in Calais and between Calais and Dover. But I think in terms of solution, one has to look at it as a criminal matter, because that is exactly what it is, and it should be dealt with stronger policing and stronger punishment. But of course, it's not as simple as that, especially when you bear in mind that a lot of the people smugglers know exactly what they're doing, and they often exploit immigrants themselves to do the dirty work in return for discounts on passages. So it's not as simple as that. And when the police move on and they move in on those responsible for the smuggling, they crack down on the immigrants first, and they are the ones who are becoming criminalized. They're the ones who are arrested and who go to prison, while the Mr. Big people smugglers escape and they carry on making a huge amount of money.
Joseph, how important is the UK in this European conversation? Because, like Joel, I've covered the migrant trail in southern Italy, in Sicily, and when you speak to these predominantly young men, they've no interest in being in Italy. They want to go north, and many of them want to be in the UK.
Completely. This is something that I hear when I'm conducting research in Marseille, even in the south of France, every year. I meet Afghans, Eritreans who feel as if that they are stuck in Marseille, even in France, and don't want to stay there and want to specifically come to the UK to link up with family members or to communities that are pre-existing here. And this is something that, is a massive draw, that there's a perception that the UK isn't an easy place economically, right? The welfare state here is not as generous as it is in Germany or France. So that's a myth that people come here to claim benefits, because, the benefits here are not as good as they are on the continent. But there's an idea that in the UK, society is less racist, that economically things are more open. If you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to open a business, things are much easier. And I think both of those perceptions are, broadly speaking, fairly accurate, right? Like the UK is not the land of milk and honey, right? But things here are definitely easier than they are sometimes on the continent. However, our withdrawal from the European Union has meant we are no longer in something called the Dublin regulations, which means that we don't have currently an existing agreement to repatriate migrants to the EU. The Dublin regulation states that migrants must claim asylum in the first safe country that they reach in terms of EU countries, right? So individuals that are coming across the channel under the Dublin regulations, clearly, if they arrived in France, should claim in France. If they arrived in Hungary, should claim in Hungary, and so on. Because we withdrew from that agreement and we've not managed to negotiate a replacement, we currently are no longer in that, right? And so the paradox here is that by claiming to take back control, we've actually, in a sense, lost control of our borders.
Do you feel, all of you, that the root cause of all of the migration is, in countries in Africa, and that the European countries should be doing more to perhaps, make life more bearable there so that people don't want to flee, Nabila?
Well, a lot of it has to do with wars, I'm afraid, and Western countries prosecuting wars in countries such as Iraq, Afghanistan. Libya is a prime example of that, and to a less overtly extent, Syria. And I think this is a very big part of the discussion about migration. And instead of conceding that Western bombing has created this mass migration and deal with it in a way that the West has a duty of care over these refugees, they are not only labelled as invaders and as a problem, but rejected. And frankly, I think I would contend that there would be much easier ways to deal with the problem if one strategy could make the process of claiming asylum a lot easier. If you have some migrants who are prepared to pay up to £3,000 to get a safe passage. Now, if that money, not a safe passage, to take risks and die at sea to get to a safe place. Now, if people are prepared to pay that kind of money, surely, it can be invested in a safer way to make it easier for them to claim asylum when they get to the country. And this will not change their status. It will just make sure that the application is speeded up and we can consider them as legitimate or not legitimate migrants in the first, and also set up points of hubs, if you like, of applications in countries such as France or Germany. Because at the end of the day, those migrants are legally entitled to call home the country they want to end up in.
Joseph, what do you make of that?
Well, I would go a step further, actually. I would say there's a distinction here between, what we saw happening in 2015 and what we see happening today. Individuals that are coming, for example, from the Ivory Coast or from Guinea are not fleeing war, right? And I think to deal with this effectively, we need to destigmatise economic migration. So there's a dichotomy that's set up between the deserving asylum seeker and the undeserving economic migrant, and I think that needs to change. Europe needs labour. Italy, for example, has got a massive labour shortage, an ageing population, so has Germany. Europe needs labour, and I think we need to destigmatise economic migration. I think we need to provide people coming from the Ivory Coast, for example, has got a 20-year life expectancy difference to Italy. Is it so unbelievable that these individuals want to leave a place and go to Italy and perhaps live 20 years longer? Of course it's not, right? Italy also needs those people, and I think that is the comprehensive solution here, is to destigmatise economic migration and for Europe to kind of wake up to the fact that it does need migration and that migration is not necessarily a negative thing.
Joel, is there an exasperation amongst the people you met in Lampedusa who live there that 12 months from now, 2 years from now, this will still be happening?
Absolutely, and we were talking to a lot of charities and NGOs that are working, trying to help these migrants and help the authorities that are unable to cope with the numbers coming across as well. And I just want to sort of repeat what we were told there, which is, to Nabila's point, you can build walls as tall as you like. You can build them in Hungary, you can build them on the Mexican border, you can build them in the Mediterranean. But until you stop people wanting to climb them, they will find a way, or they will burrow underneath, or they will get around it, right? You can move the front line from Lampedusa to Sfax or to Melilla in Morocco. These are not going to be solutions long term until you deal with the problems, until you change the way in which you are articulating the issue and have an honest conversation with the people that have put you in power. Then this is not a solution that's going to change, it's going to continue.
Nabila, one word that has jumped out in British politics this week to me was a phrase used by Suella Braverman, the British Home Secretary. She described migration as a hurricane that is coming the way of the United Kingdom. How troublesome do you find some of the rhetoric in this by populist politicians?
Well, I find it quite inflammatory and frankly unnecessary. And I think, as Joseph was saying, in the end, all these movements of people are about economics, whether you're fleeing a war, whether you're trying to better your lives. And cases have to be considered on a case-by-case basis, if you like. And one thing that all these governments fail to do, I think, is, you know, they waste so much money in futile security operations. They view these people as a security problem, not as human beings trying to better their lives.
We'll have to leave it there, Nabila. Joseph, Joel, thank you all for your time. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.